Vielen, vielen Dank. Beide Beiträge haben ja wieder sehr viele Anregungen gebracht. Die Reaktion, auch die spontanen Wählenvorträge haben gezeigt natürlich, dass hier im Saal sehr viel Zustimmung dafür ist. Aber ich glaube trotzdem gibt es sicherlich noch Bedarf an Diskussion. Dafür haben wir jetzt noch Zeit bis 6:15. Die Regeln sind ja bekannt. Also die großen, langen Reden sind jetzt gehalten, könnte man mal sagen. Ab jetzt kurze Statements, Fragen bitte. Und wie gehabt, 3 Fragen, dann gebe ich hier die Runde. Bitte auch bei Fragen sagen, an wen sich die Fragen richtet. Ja, bitte, hier. Ja, das ist natürlich Leid und Erfahrung, die natürlich alle machen, die solche Konferenzen organisieren, dass tatsächlich man die Medien natürlich zu sowas nicht bekommt. Müssen wir daran arbeiten, aber es ist halt auch eine Realität, die wir nicht unbedingt im Griff haben. Sie haben es ja gesagt, viele Medien sind ja auch in den Händen entsprechender Konzerne. Gut, jetzt waren auch noch direkte Fragen an Ilan Pappe bezüglich Uri Avnery und linken Zionisten.
I stress, maybe I didn't stress it well enough, that when I say good and bad, I'm not talking about the quality of human beings. I'm talking about the nature of the ideology. And anyone who accepts, in my mind, the basic assumptions of Zionism is not going to contribute to peace and reconciliation in Israel and Palestine. That's the problem. Now, I agree that Uri Avnery is definitely not like Peace Now, and his work against the occupation is priceless and important. And we are all thankful for his many years in the struggle against the kind of policies Israel has and is pursuing in the occupied territories. I still think that in the end of the day, we will have to walk an extra mile. We will have to walk further than he does in order to enable us to reach peace and reconciliation. Unlike him, I think that we have to face bravely and boldly the meaning of what happened in 1948 and the consequences of what happened in 1948, and therefore unreservedly and unconditionally accept the right of the Palestinian refugees to return. Unlike him, I think that the oppression of the Palestinians inside Israel is as bad as the occupation of the Palestinians in the West Bank and the ghettoization of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And unlike him, I don't think that there is any possibility of maintaining a Jewish state as a democratic and free state. So these are very serious challenges to the future. And I mentioned before, I have similar disagreements with Noam Chomsky, which I now explored in a joint book with him. This does not mean that these two very gentle men are not part of the struggle, where it counts and where it is important. But this is not good enough. This is not good enough, and this is where some sort, as I put it before, maybe a bit too drastically, but I do think that Zionism is a bit like a virus, and until it doesn't leave you altogether, you continue to sneeze in the wrong directions.
Mag es ergänzend jetzt dazu noch? Na gut, dann machen wir jetzt dabei noch Fragen an euch beide. Genau.
Just the two little questions. I'll be very brief. I think the one-state kind of movement that you mentioned, Haifa, and we had a conference in America, and we had a conference in London, and we had a conference in France, and I'm sure we're going to have conferences all over the world. Sorry?
Texas.
In Texas, yeah. I think that what happens is that all kinds of countries where the issue was never discussed are now finding the one-state solution as the best platform for which to attract the people to show solidarity with the Palestinians. I don't think anybody, apart from very spoiled diplomats, come to two-states conferences anymore. Nobody who really wants to think afresh, nobody who, as Haidar put it, had enough of what's going on, is coming to a conference on two-state solution. We know that this is not going to work, and this is dead. So I think that we don't have to expect now a kind of a mega organization that will tell you exactly what is the next step. It's still a movement, a grassroots movement that is now emerging everywhere in the world, including in Israel and Palestine. And as Haidar would tell you, it's the most surprising thing is that under occupation, people would talk about one state where it's quite easy to convince themselves that they should stick to two states because it will end the military occupation. And I think that even they know that the two-state solution is not going to end the military occupation. So what I'm saying here is that always remember that the biggest Zionist success against which we have to work is the fragmentation of the Palestinian people, to such a degree that every group seems to have its own agenda. People are as far away as the refugee camps in Lebanon, or are very near in the heart of Haifa. On the face of it, don't seem to have anything in common. And the two-state solution makes sure that they don't have much in common. And I think what the one-state solution is doing is exactly together in the future. And what we are beginning to see is together in the present, through small steps like this one. And it's not the time now, I think, to discuss, it's too late anyway, the structure, questions of representation. All these should be settled within the Palestinian polity and movement, and there are things that would be settled there. But in the meantime, the solidarity movement, I think, benefits from the one-state solution idea because it is counter-fragmentation. It's against one of the most vicious successes of the Zionist movement. And that brings me to the question of the BDS and so on. It's a different issue to say that Palestinians and Jews, and especially Palestinians, eventually would figure out for themselves what kind of a state they want. A multicultural state, a multicolor state, I don't know, whatever state. However, the connection between the BDS campaign and the negation of the two-state solution is, or the cooperation with people who are for the two-state solution, is just to make sure that you are not working with people who would say that Palestine is only in the West Bank, or that Palestine is only in Gaza, or that the only Palestinians that we are talking about are those who live under occupation. If this is what they are saying, they are not partners of our struggle, and more likely are working against our struggle, either knowingly or unknowingly. And I think that's what matters, not the slogan of two-state or one-state. And I think this should be very clear. And you could easily see it's not surprising. It's not that surprising. There isn't one person in the world who supports two-state solution and full BDS project. It's not surprising. It goes together. Thank you.
There was also a question about house demolition.
House demolition?
Yes, yes.
What do we do about it? He asked. Jeff Alper should say this. We have a very good organization working against the house demolition. But I think I pointed out what this was my message this morning, so I'll just repeat it. I think that in order to abolish and bring a stop to particular Israeli policies, you need to tackle the basic Israeli ideological infrastructure. If you want to stop what Israelis are doing That doesn't mean you don't have to demonstrate tomorrow against the latest Israeli crime. But if you only wait for the next Israeli crime to demonstrate, then you are not going to stop these crimes. If you're going to constantly have people demonstrating against Israel for what it is and not only for what it does, I think you have a chance of stopping in the future the house demolition.
Okay, dann schließen wir damit dann die Fragerunde. Das ist jetzt Zeit. Dann können wir den beiden Referenten noch Gelegenheit zu einem Schlusswort
Mazen said it, when did you speak? Yesterday or today? Confused. Sometime in the last week you said that the only ministerial committee that the Israelis have had to do with the boycott. The committee against boycott. It shows you how important in the eyes of the Israelis is the boycott campaign. So I think that I can assure you that the only two things that trigger any kind of inner debate in Israel that eventually will have to take place in order to transform the reality on the ground, the only two things that are doing it are either a catastrophic events, whether it was a suicide bomb or the defeat of the Hezbollah in Lebanon, or a successful boycott and divestment and sanction campaign. These are the only things that rattle the Israelis, that make them think that, wait a minute, maybe something is not working the way we want. And although they defend themselves by saying, oh, this is anti-Semitic, or this is Islamic, or whatever, they know this is not the case. And I think that your role is a very important role at the spearheading the non-violent struggle. There is nothing better for the birth of the kind of state that we want to have instead of what we have, if this would come out of a non-violent struggle. And if you will succeed in Europe in getting in a non-violent way the European and later the Americans and the rest of the world that was the midwife for this illegitimate child in 1947, to reborn it in a much better way, I think this will affect the nature of the future state. A state that comes out of goodwill, out of solidarity, out of humanity, looks very different than a state that comes out of struggle and blood and violence. And we know it in the post-colonialist era, how terrible some of the liberated states look because they were born out of violence. You have a chance of making people believe that they can, for once in their life, create a new reality, not with violence, but with noble ideas. And I think everyone who does his bit in the boycott and divestment and sanction campaign is contributing significantly to this dream. As for Ruby Rivlin and the question about these tendencies in the Israeli right, I would be very careful with this because, after all, he's the speaker of the most fascist, racist Knesset Israel had, which is saying a lot because the previous ones were not better. And yet this is a bit worse than the others. And you know, if you have even a modicum of decency in you, you resign the moment the first motion against Palestinians or against dissident Israelis is being passed. Having said that, as Haaretz published, settlers in the occupied territories are trying to send feelers to see whether their idea of staying in the West Bank is more acceptable in a one-state solution than in a two-state solution. And at a certain point in time, and that depends when our ideas will reach the political elite, in a certain moment in time, I think these are legitimate questions because they are all Jewish colonies, whether they were built in 1882 or they were built in 1982. And the whole question of where as Ali said, most of the refugees in 48 can return to places where nobody lives anyway. However, people who were chucked out of the West Bank, their places have been taken. And as all kinds of previous arrangements in the past have shown, a very good matrix, a very good combination of return, reparations, of transferring people in a way that is part of the wish to create a much more equitable society. All of this can be done, and all of this can be agreed upon once we have free people negotiating with each other. And I think we should not be afraid of these questions. If you think that the most difficult question is, for instance, what do I do with Jewish settlers who now have moved into the house of a Palestinian family in Sheikh Jarrah in 10 years' time? Do I kick them out after 10 years because they will come after 10 years and tell, we already have children in this house, And you will say, what do I do with the children? Do I kick them out although they were kicked out? This is only one of the problems. We have Palestinians in 48, Israel, or Palestine, sorry, who have moved into the houses that belong to Palestinians who were kicked out in 1948. So all these questions will be dealt with, and we can deal with them. I think we can deal with them. I don't think, I'm giving you a very long answer, but I don't think that the right-wing ideologues and politicians like Reuven Rivlin mean it the way I mean it. I think what they are looking for is the feeling whether a kind of an acknowledgement of the Nakba would seal the story of the Arab-Israeli conflict as they see it. A kind of a goodwill. I think that, a crime is not settled by goodwill. Acknowledgement is only part of the process. Accountability is probably a far more important section of it. Thank you.
Vielen Dank nochmal, Ilan Pappe. Vielen Dank auch nochmal bei Evelyn Hecht-Galinski für Ihre Vorträge und Diskussionsbeiträge hier. Eine kleine Meldung noch aus Berlin von der parallelen Veranstaltung. Die war auch ein großer Erfolg. Also die Veranstaltung mit Finkelstein. Die Veranstaltung war gut besucht mit 300 Leuten. Und die Israel-Lobby hat mit 30 Leuten vor dem Hotel demonstriert. Also das ist Ihnen also diesmal nicht gelungen zu verhindern. Wobei man muss natürlich sagen, das kann man sich nicht immer leisten. Ich weiß, dass die Saalmiete für dieses Hotel Maritim halt 5.000 bis 6.000 Euro gekostet hat. Das ist halt nicht immer drin für einen Abend. Die hier diese Veranstaltung versucht haben zu finanzieren, wissen das. Gut, jetzt zum Ende möchte ich mich eigentlich auch noch bedanken bei den beiden Dolmetschern, die hier so wacker durchgehalten haben. Eine Stunde länger.